Hello everyone and welcome to episode 3 of Talking Racing Nonsense. There has been an episode in the last wee while because I've been very busy focusing on studying and everything, and I just hadn't had the motivation to do it, if I'm being honest. But yeah, in today's episode we're going to be talking about the IndyCar, Formula 1, Formula 2 and Formula 3 action this weekend. Of course, it was the IndyCar and Formula 3 finales, and both of them were very, very exciting. In total, 11 drivers could win these two championships, 6 in Formula 3 and 5 in IndyCar, heading into the final races, which were both on Sunday the 11th of September. Of course, the anniversary of 9/11. And of course, that wasn't the only thing to have happened this week, the anniversary of 9/11. Of course, the Queen Elizabeth II passed away on my birthday on the 8th of September. I did not expect that to be what happened on my birthday. I did not expect the 8th of September to ever be a relevant day in history, but I've been proven wrong on that. But yeah, let's start off by talking about the Formula One. And before the weekend started, it was reported that Pierre Gasly was ill, and it turns out he wasn't the one that ended up needing to get replaced, as Alex Albon got diagnosed with. Let me just try and pronounce this. Appendicitis. I think I said that right, appendicitis. And Nick de Vries, the Formula E champion, not this season, last season, ended up taking his place. And there was grid penalties galore. The only driver who started in the same place where he qualified was Charles Leclerc, who qualified on pole position, ahead of Max Verstappen, who'd start 7th, and Carlos Sainz, who'd start in 18th. So the grid looked like this. It was Leclerc, Russell, Norris, Ricciardo, Gasly, Alonso, Verstappen, Nick de Vries on debut for Williams, qualified in 13th and would be starting 8th. And in the race, Max Verstappen had an incredible drive. He managed to get up to second in the first 5 laps, and Red Bull yet again outdid Ferrari on strategy, although to be fair to Ferrari, they didn't actually do a terrible strategy this time. Daniel Ricciardo retired right at the end of the race on lap 45, midway, like in between the two Lesmos, meaning that the race finished under the safety car. And Nick de Vries and Joe Guan Yu, I should say, were under investigation for some sort of break in one of the rules, but they both got away with it. And de Vries came home in 9th place. Which is incredible. He becomes the 67th driver to score points on debut. Of course, in the last 3 races where there's been debutants in Formula 1, all of them, there's at least one of them has scored a point. As this race, Nick de Vries filled in for Alex Albon, making his F1 debut, and he scored 2 points, which is actually a third of Williams' total points score this season. Joe Guan Yu, of course, debuted in Bahrain this year, and he finished in 10th. And then, of course, last season, we had Yuki Tsunoda finishing in the points on his debut. He finished in 14th yesterday, I should say. Vettel retired on lap 10. Alonso was complaining of ERS problems and later retired of water pressure problems. Stroll made it a double DNF for Aston Martin due to overheating in the engine, same problem as Vettel. And Ricciardo, like I said, was the last retirement on lap 45. Kevin Magnussen finished last in the Haas, and then it was Nicholas Latifi, who, despite Williams' incredible straight line speed, finished at only 15th. Yuki Tsunoda was 14th for AlphaTauri, and Valtteri Bottas had a nightmare for Alfa Romeo, finishing in 13th. 12th was Mick Schumacher, who had a very good race, considering how slow the Haas looked. Esteban Ocon was 11th in what was a very poor weekend for Alpine, where they didn't score any points. Joe Guan Yu took more points in his F1 career, another one added on to his total. And then, like I said, on debut, number 45, Nick de Vries, took 2 points for Williams and did an incredible job. Pierre Gasly was 8th for AlphaTauri. He had a relatively quiet race. Lando Norris had a decent race as well. The chances were he was going to finish in 7th or 8th, considering the fact that he had Perez, Hamilton, and Sainz behind him on the grid. Hamilton was another one that got a grid penalty. Red Bull tried a strategy to and it did not pay off for them. They pitted Sergio Perez for new tyres, knowing that he'd lose out to Hamilton, but they obviously didn't think that there'd be another safety car, so they were expecting him to pass Hamilton again, but he didn't in the end, losing a point in the World Championship, although he did sit fast laps, that's why he only lost a point. Lewis Hamilton finished 5th for Mercedes. He actually didn't look very good in the first stint, however, he made up progress slowly but surely, slow and steady wins the race. And then we had the incredible drive that Carlos Sainz had, where he went up into the top 10 within the first 10 laps of the race, ending up 4th in the end, having a fight with George Russell, who started 2nd on the grid. And then we had just the front two who were in a league of their own as per usual, Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. And Verstappen taking his 5th win in a row, he could potentially beat Sebastian Vettel's records from the 2013 season. And Max is just looking incredible at the moment. Charles is fantastic, but Max is in a league of his own at the moment. He could win the championship next time out in Singapore. But so at the moment, the championship standings look like this. So Max Verstappen leads the World Championship on 335 points. And as things stand, if things keep going the way they are, he could probably end up winning the Constructors alone for Red Bull, just like Seb did in 2000. And was it 11 or 13? I think it was 2011 that he did that. I'm not sure. I'll quickly check which year it was. I know it was one of those 2 years, because those were the 2 years that he absolutely dominated the championship, and my keyboard isn't working, so I'm going to have to manually go and find that. But yeah, Max is absolutely dominating the championship at the moment. He's probably going to beat Seb's records. Red Bull are dominating the Constructors. At the moment, Verstappen loses championship from Leclerc, and then 3rd is Perez, 4th is Russell, and 5th is Sainz. And my stat has revealed that Vettel would have, on his own, won the championship in 2013, and I can see the same thing happening this year. It looked as though at the start of the season that it would be a title fight, but it has not turned out that way. I mean, just look at the championship standings. Max Verstappen, 335 points. Charles Leclerc, 219. Now, if you can't do mathematics, that's 116 points between the two of them. Perez is 9 points behind Leclerc on 210. Russell's a further 7 back from those two on 203. He's had a very consistent season. And then it's Sainz on 187. And in the Constructors, Red Bull lead Ferrari by 139 points. Red Bull are on 545, Ferrari on 406. Mercedes are only 35 points behind Ferrari now. Chances are they will finish ahead of them this year. Alpine are on 125 points, and McLaren are on 107. But now we move on to Formula 2. And let's just I'll quickly say before actually, there was a very, very interesting story that came out just today about Alex Albon, and I wish him well. I'll get the full story up right now. If my keyboard still isn't working, so I don't know how I'm going to be able to. But I'll get my phone out actually and I'll find it. So Alex Albon, like I said, he was diagnosed with appendicitis, which is quite a serious condition. And the news is that Alex Albon was in intensive care, which is really, really bad if you don't know already, on Saturday night as he suffered with unexpected post-operative anesthetic complications, which led to a respiratory failure, which basically means respiratory failure can kill you because it can stop your lungs from breathing, I believe. It can be so severe for some people. It depends on it depends on your weight, it depends on your heart, it depends on health condition, etc. But Alex Albon's a very fit person, so you'd expect him to be on fine, and he's making excellent progress now and is off a ventilator. Another quote is, "He has now been transferred to the general ward and is expected to return home tomorrow." and this is Monday that I'm recording this, there were no other complications. Alex's full focus is on recovery and preparation ahead of the Singapore GP in 2 weeks' time. So maybe De Vries just might be able. De Vries might not be able to. I don't know if De Vries will be racing again, because appendicitis is quite a serious thing, so you never know. But yeah, so now we move on to Formula 2, and there was a this was after the race weekend, but Felipe Drugovich is now a member of the Aston Martin junior category. Aston Martin Junior. Here it is, the Aston Martin F1 driver development program, and Felipe Drugovich is the maiden member of this program. Of course, back in the early 2010s, McLaren, former, I worded that wrong. Red Bull Junior Cihan Daruvla actually was scouted by none other than Force India, now known as Aston Martin, and he was touted as a future talent. Now, of course, he is in Formula 2, and he, in fact, won the feature race, which was absolute chaos. So, in the sprint race, first of all, in qualifying, Jack Doohan was on pole, and this was his third pole of the season, which for a rookie is outstanding. But what shocked me the most was Amaury Cordeel. Now, Amaury Cordeel has not got a good racing reputation, and he doesn't have a good reputation in general. But he actually did really, really well in qualifying. And had he had a better feature race, he probably could have gotten double points. But yeah, Jack Doohan had a really, really unlucky weekend because he was absolutely fantastic. He probably would have won the feature race, but he hit problems. But the main issue wasn't the crash that he had. It was actually the fact that on the formation lap, he actually didn't get going very quickly. He ended up dropping to fifth on the formation lap. So he had to pass a few cars on the formation lap. Thankfully, he got going quickly. But what was the problem was his steering wheel had an issue, meaning that he wasn't able to basically wasn't able to upshift or downshift very quickly, meaning that he probably wouldn't have finished the race even if he hadn't had his first lap collision with Logan Sargent, and I forgot who the other driver was he collided with. But now we go back to the sprint race, and Yuri Vips won ahead of Frederick Vesti, Cihan Daruvla, and Logan Sargent. There was 5 DNFs, and in this race, Theo Pourchaire had multiple incidents, meaning he didn't finish in the points, meaning Felipe Drugovich became the 2022 Formula 2 champion, becoming the first Brazilian winner on the second step to Formula 1 since Bruno Junqueira back in 2000, I believe. Again, I can't really fact check that because my keyboard isn't working. And because of the next day he signed the contract to become a member of the Aston Martin team. It was confirmed on Monday. So congratulations to him. I don't know if anyone from Aston Martin will be listening to this. I've got a few friends over at Aston Martin, but I doubt any of them will be listening to this. So another interesting story was that Roy Nissany had a race ban. So Luca Ghiotto, who hasn't competed in Formula 2 since 2020, came back for a race. He's been racing in GT World Challenge since 2021, and he's been all right. But it's really interesting that they chose him of all options. And Dams, the fee to race for Dams for one race weekend was $500,000, which is a joke. But now we move on to the sprint race and the feature race, and it was absolute chaos, just like this recording has been so far. So Ayumu Iwasa got disqualified after the race finished, Tatiana Calderon withdrew because of a collision with Ollie Caldwell in the previous day. And speaking of collisions, there was a total of 6 cars which were out by the end of the first lap. Well, Doohan technically got 1 lap done and then retired in the pits. But Doohan had a collision with Logan Sargent, and then Theo Pourchaire, Ralph Bosch, and Luca Giotto and Ollie Caldwell all had a collision after the first corner. And it was chaos. It was so chaotic that Amaury Cordio finished 7th, and Marino Sato was actually leading the race and fighting for the lead at one point on merit. That's how crazy it was. Keeping in mind that Marino Sato is not the smartest tool in the shed when it comes to driving. But yeah, that was Formula 2. And then we move on to by far the most entertaining aspect of the weekend, Monza Formula 3. And it was incredible. So, I haven't actually got the Wikipedia report. However, I do have the report from the F3 website. So, heading into the final round at Monza, on pole was Alex Smoyer. He took a very good pole position. And second was Zane Maloney, who I didn't actually realise was a title contender. Third was Roman Staniek. So basically, second to 6th were all championship contenders, as it was Zane Maloney, Roman Staniek, Victor Martins, Arthur Leclerc, and Ollie Bearman. And out of those guys, Bearman and Maloney are rookies, so it's very impressive that they're doing so well. Meanwhile, their other championship rivals, Isaac Hadjar and who's the other title contender again? I think yeah, it was him and Jack Crawford. Isaac Hadjar qualified only 16th, and Jack Crawford qualified in 8th. Then the first race happened, sprint race, and Franco Colapinto won. It was a very good drive from him. And I believe now at this point, there was a couple of drivers which were out the title fight. Only a couple. It wasn't, I think heading into the final round, 7 or 8 drivers could win it. I'm not actually sure how many it was. I'll need to check that. I don't know where the standings are for like at the end of each round in Formula 3. But it was very, very close heading into the final round. In fact, I think I know how to get it up. I'll just find it now. Give me a minute, guys. Basically, I go into my computer and I look at the races, basically, and I basically cover them quickly. Yeah, so heading into the final round, Victor Martins led the championship by 5 points from Isaac Hadjar. Final 2 races this was. Staniek was basically Staniek, Bearman and Maloney were sort of in that it could happen, but it's slightly unlikely. And then a little bit further back was Leclerc. I'm just trying to remember who else was it. A little bit further back was Leclerc and Crawford, and they were basically they were in the category which was, you're probably not going to win it. You're almost definitely not going to win it. And the first race basically confirmed this. So Leclerc finished 8th in the sprint race, which only gave him 3 points. Whereas Maloney finished 4th, Bearman finished 2nd, and Crawford finished 7th. Hadjar didn't even finish the sprint race, I'm pretty sure. And Victor Martins finished 10th. So heading into the last race, Martins, Maloney, Bearman, Hadjar, Staniek, and Leclerc could all win the title. Leclerc and Staniek were the most unlikeliest ones. Maloney, Bearman, and Martins and Hadjar were the 4 who were really with it into the shout of winning it. And in the end, it was Martins that won it. So at the end of the race, there was a massive bit of chaos about, who's actually won it, because Martins got given a 5-second penalty, and because they couldn't find what the gaps were, no one knew where he'd finished. Martins finished 4th, in the end with the penalties added on, and won the title by 5 points from the incredible Zane Maloney. After the Red Bull Ring round, he hadn't had a single podium. That was 5 rounds into the season. But since Hungary, he's been on a mad one. He's collected by far the most points of any driver. You know, he's had 4 podiums, all of which were in the feature races, which is where they count. And he's just had an incredible season. Ollie Beerman too. Beerman got 2 second places, which is very tricky to do. Frederick Vesti did the same in Formula 2. And I think Beerman and Maloney are going to be stars. If Maloney can get the financial backing that he needs, he's going to be a Formula 1 driver in the future, absolutely. Martins is very good, but I think Hadjar, Beerman and Maloney are all much better. Out of the top 9 drivers, 4 of them are rookies. Colapinto is another driver who's massively impressed me, because look at Maloney, Beerman and Hadjar. Their teams are actually good. You know, High Tech, Prema and Trident are well-known teams in motorsport in junior categories for being successful. Van Amersfoort's not. This was Van Amersfoort's first season in Formula 3, and Colapinto took 2 sprint race wins and 3 more podiums to add on to that, and finished 9th in the standings, which is very impressive in my opinion. I just think Colapinto was fantastic as well. But yeah, that's Formula 3 sort of covered. It was an incredibly exciting season in Formula 3. Martins was fantastic. I feel as though Beerman and Maloney, if they had the same amount of experience as Martins, they would have easily won. But, you know, that's just my opinion. And then we move on to the final segment before we move on to History Corner, and that is, of course, IndyCar. Now, IndyCar was incredible, absolutely fantastic. As heading into the final round, 5 drivers could win the championship from 2 different teams. The 3 Penske drivers, Scott McLaughlin, Will Power, and Joseph Newgarden, and the 2 of the 4 Ganassi drivers in Marcus Ericsson and not Alex Palou, Scott Dixon. So just give me a minute, guys, to get this, to find this. Keeping in mind that my keyboard isn't working, and it'll take too long to get it working. So basically, I gotta manually find a way to get to. I've got to find a way to manually get to the IndyCar screen, basically. I'll find a way, guys. Don't worry. Just give me a minute. Right, I'm nearly there. Just give me 1 more minute, guys. I promise I'll be able to get there. Right, yeah, I am almost there. Right, there we go. So I've got the IndyCar season, basically, here. So, heading into the final round of the season, like I said, 6 drivers could win the championship, and Will Power was the favourite. He took pole position for Penske, and Joseph Newgarden had a really disappointing qualifying, starting dead last on the grid. And it was an interesting race. It was at Laguna Seca, very well-known racing circuit, of course, well-known for the famous corkscrew. And in the end, it was Power that came out on top by 16 points. He didn't win the race. Alex Palou had an incredible drive, came out of nowhere. Even he was surprised by how well he did, winning by half a minute, which in IndyCar is almost unheard of. And it was an incredible race from Palou, and an even more incredible one from Newgarden, as he finished second. An incredible strategy from the Penske team put him back into contention. Romain Grosjean also was a driver in a very good race. They put him on a very, very interesting strategy, though, which meant that by the end of the race, he was losing 5 to 10 seconds a lap to the other drivers, resulting in him finishing 7th in the end. Christian Lundgaard finished 5th, winning Rookie of the Year by 18 points from David Malukas. And overall, I'd say the IndyCar season was very good. Power was absolutely fantastic. Newgarden was brilliant. Dixon was really unlucky at Laguna Seca. He was really, really unlucky. He finished almost a lap down. McLaughlin did all right. I think he probably could have done a bit better if he had just nailed qualifying. But, you know, if Newgarden had nailed qualifying, he probably would have won the race and would have been 5 or 6 points closer. I don't actually know how the IndyCar point system works. I think it's 50, 45, 40, 35, 30. I don't even remember from there on, to be honest. I have a really bad memory. Yeah, it was an absolutely fantastic season of IndyCar. I cannot wait until next season. It's going to be a thoroughly entertaining year, and I cannot wait for that. So now we're going to move on to History Corner, and I decided today that we're going to cover the 1958 F1 season. Now, I did a video on my channel about this season a long, long time ago. However, I want to delve deep into it, like really deep into it. I made an article on it as well. However, I still want to make a video on it. So we're going to start off with what the grid looked like heading into the season. So heading into the 1958 season, the news was that Juan Manuel Fangio, the 5-time champion, arguably the greatest driver of all time, wasn't going to be doing the full season, and this meant that, you know, it was expected that he was going to be replaced, and he was. And it was expected that the best team was going to be Ferrari, and Van Wall was a team that people were expecting to do well, following a very good performance at the British Grand Prix the previous year. And Maserati was expected to be slightly outside of it, as was BRM. And there was a new team on the grid in the second round, Monaco, by the name of Lotus, and they scored their first points in Belgium just 2 rounds later, because I'm not counting Indy 500. I'm sorry, Jimmy Bryan. I'm sorry, Johnny Boyd. I'm sorry, Red Amek. Or is it George? Hang on. Are they brothers, or is he nicknamed Red? Yeah, it's George Amek. I'm sorry, Tony Bettenhausen. I'm sorry, Tim Rathman. But you guys are going to be in my video in this podcast. I'm sorry. But yeah, round 1 in Argentina, and Fangio took pole because he was doing the race, and it was a catastrophe because only 10 cars were on the grid. None of the British teams were ready. So Sterling Moss entered a Cooper, which was entered by his friend Rob Walker, who was an heir to the famous Johnny Walker alcohol franchise. And he started 7th. He was 2 seconds slower than Fangio in qualifying. Fangio was a master around Buenos Aires. Hawthorne was 2nd. Collins was 3rd. Berra was 4th, and Musso was 5th in his qualifying. So because the British teams weren't there, Tony Brooks wasn't there, Stuart Lewis Evans wasn't there. Jean Berra and Harry Schell did manage to race because they got Maseratis for the event. Maserati covered 6 out of 10 of the cars on the grid. There was 3 Ferraris, 1 Cooper, and 6 Maseratis. 3 Ferraris, 1 Cooper, yeah. And Moss ended up winning the race in the end. So Berra led the opening lap after starting 4th, and then Hawthorne took the lead until lap 9. Fangio then dominated the race until lap 34, when, and to be fair, everyone actually finished the race apart from Collins, who retired on the opening lap, hence why Berra was able to lead the opening lap, because he had one last car to pass, basically. Yeah, Fangio led until lap 34, and then Sterling Moss took the lead on lap 34 and led the rest of the race. Took his what would that have been, 9th Grand Prix win at that point? I'm just guessing that it's his 9th. I don't actually know. I'm gonna quickly check what win this would have been for him. So he won 3, 4, 5, 6. It was his 7th win in Formula One, and heading into the second round in Monaco, the British teams were now ready, and the grid was made up of 26 cars, which was a stark contrast to the 10 cars which had lined up on the grid in Argentina. And on pole for the race was Tony Brooks, second was Jean Berra, and then it was 3 Coopers in a row as the rear-engined motto of the rear-engined cars was beginning to take charge following Moss's win in Argentina. Many people thought that was a one-off win. However, this would be the race weekend where they'd be proved wrong, as despite Brooks taking pole by 1.3 seconds, he wouldn't be the one leading at the checkered flag. Why? He retired on lap 22. Other notable retires from the race included Stirling Moss and Mike Hawthorne, meaning that it was going to be either Musso, Collins, or Cooper that was going to win the race. Hawthorne and Moss had led at some points in the race, but they both retired while leading. The man who picked up the pieces from them was the 1955 Monaco Grand Prix winner, Maurice Trintignant, who took his second win in Formula One, his final one. This proved that the rear-engined idea was true, and it was one that was taking form. In the driver's standings, Luigi Musso led because he had finished second 2 races in a row. In fact, De Filippis didn't even race, actually. It says that she qualified, but she actually didn't. Maria Teresa De Filippis, the female driver. Luigi Musso led the championship standings. Stirling Moss was second, tied with Trintignant, although because Moss had I don't know how he would have been ahead, but fourth was Hawthorne and fifth was Collins, as Collins collected his first points in this race. Cooper led the constructors by 4 points from Ferrari. Then they had the Dutch Grand Prix at the Netherlands, and on pole, shockingly, was Stuart Lewis-Evans in the Van Wall, and it was a dominant show from Van Wall, a 1-2-3 in qualifying for the British outfit. Ferrari were just 10th, 12th, and 6th. Hawthorne 6th, Collins 10th, and Musso 12th. They were slower than the Coopers and the BRMs, and it looked as though they might not be a contender for the championships after all. However, later on it would be decided. So yes, Lewis-Evans got pole. However, Moss led and dominated. He didn't take a Grand Slam. However, he led every lap and won the race by 48 seconds from Harry Schell and Jean Berra's BRMs. Roy Salvadori was fourth for Cooper and Hawthorne was fifth. Meanwhile, Brooks retired yet again, Musso was seventh, and Collins took yet another DNF. So now in the constructors, Cooper led by 5 points from Ferrari, and Moss led the championship by 5 points from Musso. Trintignant was still third, tied with Harry Schell, and fifth was Mick Hawthorne on 7 points. Van Wall had got up to third in the constructors, tied with BRM, but they were ahead because they had won a race. BRM hadn't. It was the same case with Trintignant and Schell, as Trintignant had won a race and Schell hadn't. Maserati were fifth with 3 points. And then no one cares about the Indy 500. Then came the Belgian Grand Prix. Hawthorne took pole position, and alongside him on the front row was Ferrari teammate Musso. Third was Moss, fourth was Collins, and fifth was Brooks. And then Olivier Gendebien, a home hero, qualified sixth in his Ferrari. A good performance from the Belgian, and he'd later proved to be a fantastic endurance racer and a decent driver in single-seaters. Keeping in mind that Spa was a 14-kilometer long circuit, 4 tenths between Hawthorne and Musso is actually quite close. And despite Brooks qualifying only fifth, he ended up leading the race at the end of the first lap. Only 2 drivers actually led the race. Collins and Brooks. Despite despite Brooks and Collins qualifying 5th and 4th, they were the only drivers that led the race. And it was Brooks that won in the end. From Hawthorne, Lewis Evans, and Cliff Allison took Lotus's first points in Formula 1 with 4th. 5th was Harry Schell, and retiring from the race were Moss on the opening lap with engine failure, Collins yet again on lap 5 with overheating, and Musso crashed on lap 5. But then came the French Grand Prix, a very, very tragic affair. On pole was Hawthorne, and second was Musso. Harry Schell was third, 4th was Collins, 5th was Brooks, and 6th was Moss. Then Morris Trintignant was 7th, Fangio was taking part in the race and qualified in 8th, and Vera was 9th. At the start, Hawthorne led and was battling with Musso, but then tragedy struck. Heading into the Mouzon hairpin, turn 3 on the circuit, Musso had a high-speed crash, was thrown into a ditch. His car crashed into a ditch and he was thrown out of the car. He passed away later that day in hospital. Out of the 21 drivers who started the race, many of them would go on to lose their lives in cars. Hawthorne would lose his life in a car accident. Von Trips, who took his maiden podium, would die in 1961 following an accident in Italy. Collins, who passed away later this season. Joe Bonnier passed away in 1972 following an accident at Le Mans. Harry Schell died in 1960 following a crash at Silverstone. Jean Berra passed away at the AVUS. Sir Lewis Evans passed away later on in the 1958 season. And Luigi Musso lost his life at this very race. Motor racing was so dangerous in these days. Hawthorne won the race from Moss and Von Trips. However, it was quite tricky for him to celebrate. Although he did have a massive rivalry with Musso, which made Musso deeply in debt. Heading into the next race, Moss and Hawthorne were tied on championship points, and now deceased Musso was third. Ferrari were 6 points ahead of Van Wall. Then it was the British Grand Prix, and it was a British show with the top 7 cars. In fact, no, not even the top 7 cars. The top 3 cars on the grid were British. However, out of the top 7 drivers, 6 of them were British, with Harry Schell being the one that stopped that affair. Moss started on pole by 4 tenths from Schell, and third was Roy Salvadori. 4th was Mike Hawthorne, and 5th was Cliff Allison. Collins dominated though, despite starting 6th on the grid, taking the lead on the first lap, and winning by 24.2 seconds from Hawthorne, who took fastest lap and got a point. Salvadori took his first of 2 podiums in Formula 1, and what was a very good drive from him. Just checking, it was his first. And he would score a podium at the very next race in Germany. However, that wasn't the main headline. Collins, who had taken a fantastic win in Britain, suffered what was only described as another tragedy. Now, before this race started, over a dozen cars that were entered were Formula 2 cars, driven by drivers such as Jack Brabham, Phil Hill, Bruce McLaren, and Graham Hill, all of whom were absolutely incredible drivers. And Brucey actually finished 5th. However, because he was in a Formula 2 car, he wasn't allowed to score points. Moss led the first 3 laps, However, then he retired with a magnet problem. He took fastest lap, however, and that gave him a point. Hawthorne led lap 4, however, he retired 7 laps later with clutch issues. But just 1 lap before that, Peter Collins, who had been battling with Brooks for the lead, had a horrific crash. Collins was pushing his Ferrari to the limit and ran too wide, crashed into a ditch, and went flying into the air. Collins was now the second Ferrari driver to have lost his life that season, and one of many in the history of Formula One at that point, as Alfonso De Portago, Eugenio Castellotti, and Alberto Ascari, who were all Ferrari drivers, also lost their lives. However, a couple of them were in Lancias. After Germany, there was Portugal, and Ferrari were still devastated, but continued on with just 2 entries, as Hawthorne and Von Trips were the drivers that Ferrari chose for the Portuguese Grand Prix, and this marked a turning point in the Formula One season. Hawthorne was initially disqualified for going off the track and re-entering at a part which was not considered to be on the track. However, Moss gave his perspective of the incident, and thus the stewards changed their minds. Meaning, Hawthorne was saved 7 points by Moss. All I'm going to say is, you didn't need to do that, mate. Moss sacrificed a potential championship to be fair. And I'm not just saying to be fair as in like, oh, to be fair. I'm genuinely saying to be fair to Hawthorne. This just shows how much of a gentleman he was. It was a dominant race win for Moss as well. He led all but 6 laps of the race. Von Trips led the other 5, showing the talent that he had in him, becoming the first German driver to lead a Grand Prix since the 30s, when, of course, the era of pre-war drivers such as Rosemeyer, Caracciola, Stuck, and who else was there? And Lang were around. I mean, to be fair, there was probably a race. Hans Hermann probably led a race, so did Carl Kling probably, but I don't know. But the results were that Moss won by 5 minutes from Hawthorne, a fantastic win, but keeping in mind that the Boa Vista track was very long and the fastest lap time was a 2-minute lap time, he basically won. Hang on, how was the fastest lap a 2-minute 32 and yet Moss didn't lap him? I'm really confused at that. That's probably wrong. It was probably 2 minutes and 12 seconds, not 5 minutes. But yeah. Sir Lewis Evans took his second podium, finishing 3rd. 4th was Jean Berra, and 5th was Von Trips. And yet again, Tony Brooks retired. This time it was his own fault though, as he spun off on lap 37. There was 2 rounds left in the season in Monza and Ain Diab. Who was going to win the title? Who knows? In qualifying, Moss took yet another pole position. Brooks was 2nd on the grid, and Hawthorne was 3rd. And it looked as though anyone could win the champion. Any of the 3 of them, out of Brooks, Hawthorne, and and Moss could win the title. And it was so mathematically possible heading into the final 2 rounds. However, it was very much going to happen that one of the 3, more specifically Brooks, was going to end up out the title fight due to his unreliability. However, it wasn't in the way you think, the way you got out the title fight, as he actually won the race. He started 2nd on the grid behind Moss, and because it was Monza, there was 4 different drivers who led the race Phil Hill in the Ferrari, who finished third, Mike Hawthorne in the other Ferrari, who finished second, Sterling Moss, who retired, and Tony Brooks, who led the last 9 laps of the race and won by 25 seconds from Hawthorne, which was very, very rare at Monza at that time for someone to win by such a huge margin. What was very interesting, though, was that in the shared drive between Maston Gregory and Carroll Shelby in fourth, neither of them got any points. This was the only time Shelby actually finished in the points in Formula One, but of course he became well known for other things, such as winning Le Mans with the man who finished behind him in this race, Roy Salvadori, in 1959. Brooks was now out the title fight, and Ferrari had finally been overtaken by Van Walt a round previously. In the drivers, Hawthorne led by 8 points from Moss. Van Walt led Ferrari by 6 points. Now, it was a direct duel between the two as they headed into the final round in Ain Diab. Wait a second, that can't be right. He couldn't have been 8 points behind him heading into the final round because... Wait, what? I'm a bit confused here. Correction, actually. He was 4 points ahead of him heading into the final round. But anyway, it was very complicated back then how it worked. On pole was Hawthorne heading into the final round, and alongside him on the front row was his championship challenger, Sterling Moss. Lewis Evans was third, Brooks was seventh, Bear was fourth, fifth was Hill, and sixth was Jean Debian. Moss dominated the race, leading every single lap and taking fastest lap. But Hawthorne won the championship by just 0.8. 1 point. And the reason why? Phil Hill let through his teammate right at the end of the race. And thus, Hawthorne's second place was enough to win the World Championship. However, that wasn't the biggest event that happened in that race. As with 12 laps to go, Stewart Lewis Evans had a suspension failure and crashed into the barriers. His car was set alight, and 6 days later, he passed away due to burns. Rest in peace to both of them. Both of them were fantastic. He was a fantastic driver. So was the other two who passed away. And by the end of the season, Moss had announced his retirement due to the death of his friend, Peter Collins, sorry. And now, time for the saddest part. Hawthorne won the World Championship, but in January that year, in the following year, lost his life in a car crash. As he crashed after going a little bit too quick on the motorway past none other than Rob Walker, Moss's friend. Moss never won a championship. Phil Hill won the World Championship in 1961. And if you want an update on every driver on the grid, look through it yourself. All I'm saying is, in that final round, there was... Let me just count. There was 10 Grand Prix winners. And out of them, 4 became world champions. As out of the bunch, Graham Hill won 2 championships, Jack Brabham won 3, Phil Hill and Mike Hawthorne both won 1. The race winners were Maurice Trintignant, Graham Hill, Bruce McLaren, Jack Brabham, Phil Hill, Mike Hawthorne, Sterling Moss, Tony Brooks, and fair to say the grid was very good. This was also another interesting fact about this race was that it had the only Moroccan F1 entry of all time, as Robert Lacaze entered under a Moroccan license, becoming the only ever Moroccan Formula One driver. But anyway, I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. This is by far the longest episode, 50 minutes, and I will see you all later. Bye. That's History Corner for you.